Hello, Flutie friends. Welcome back to the channel. So this week, I wanted to touch a little bit on the difference between burnout and laziness. This is going to be a little bit controversial because I think that, at least when I was growing up, and things have changed a lot now, but at the time that I was going through music school, the idea of burnout was not at the forefront of our minds, right? We were not talking about, being burnt out, burning the candle at both ends, that kind of thing. We were more focused on what I not so lovingly refer to as this concept of weeding out the weak. And I think that it's a disservice to the music industry as a whole, and particularly the classical music world, and part of it stems from, as much, I don't want to get super political here, but a lot of it stems from this kind of capitalist society that we've created, right? Where, if you're doing something and it's not making you money, then it's not worth it. If you're not hustle, then you're lazy. And if you're poor, it's your fault. If you are, not making it in the world, then it's your fault. And you're not working hard enough. You don't want it enough. And I really hate that mentality, because what that doesn't take into account is, one, just obstacles that come from not just physical and mental obstacles that happen, but also, socioeconomic obstacles, generally just obstacles that come up that don't inherently show in a lot of the cis white men, at least in that vein of classical music. So we kind of touched on this in the Inline G podcast that I just did, where we talked about how, we're starting to see more diversity in the music world, and we love this, right? And part of the reason is because we're not really standing for this idea of, if you don't have time or don't have the energy or don't have the ability to practice for 6 hours a day, then you don't deserve to be here. Or if you don't have if you're not going into college with a $7,000 flute, then you don't deserve to be here. We're also getting away from the idea that you have to, if you are going to have a hobby, right? It has to make you money. You have to be a professional at it, or else it's not worth your time. I tell my adult students this all the time, that it is 100% worth your time to be here. Okay, if it makes you happy. You don't have to monetize this. You don't need to go and start a band. You don't need to go and play in a professional orchestra. You don't need to teach your own students if you don't want to. This does not have to be what you do in your career. You don't have to career this to make it a priority, right? It can just make you happy and be a priority. And, again, a lot of the mentalities in the professional music world and in the college music world that value this, person that can go without any sleep and can practice for 6 hours a day and, not and suffer through the burnout and whatnot. They don't take into account, chronic illness. They don't take into account mental health. They don't take into account having to have a job through college. They don't take into account not being wealthy enough to, have the nicest instrument, right? And fighting against your instrument. They don't take into account any of those things. And so it's unbelievably unfair. Okay. And I know there's going to be somebody in the comments that says, well, life's not fair. Sure, but are we doing a disservice to the classical music industry as a whole? Are we letting go of incredible musicians and pushing them out simply because they had other circumstances, right? Simply because we did not accommodate, the circumstances that they came into this world, right? And one of those things that I want to hone in on is the idea of burnout. Again, when I was coming in through college, burnout was not a conversation. If you weren't in the practice room, you were lazy. period. And, I came from a arguably lower socioeconomic status. I did not have private lessons until I was a junior in high school, simply because I didn't have access to teachers. I did not come into college with a $7,000 instrument. I came into college with a $1,500, and at the time that was rather expensive anyway. I mean, I would argue that's still expensive for, a high school kid. I went into college with a $1,500 step-up instrument that, ultimately kind of I was having to fight against. I didn't know that there were resources out there to help me get another instrument. I did not know that because no one ever had those conversations with me. And again, at the times when I was working, I had to have a job while I was in college. And at some points during college, I was working 2 or 3 jobs to sustain myself. When I was working, I wasn't able to be in the practice room when some of my counterparts did not have to work. So they were spending their time practicing and studying and doing all of those things. And I think that also, we talk about, particularly in the college music world, how unbelievably grueling being a college music education, or not just music education, but music major can be. We talk about how many, I remember my freshman year, and mind you, I still had to have a job. My freshman year, I was working, I had 18 credit hours and 3 0-credit classes. And then on top of that, I was expected to be in the practice room for hours a day. I was expected to be, studying theory and history and preparing assignments for my, music education 101, where we were actually going and teaching middle schoolers. This is where the music world can be quite elitist, right? And again, we didn't talk about burnout. So I got severely burnt out. And I didn't know what that was, right? I did not understand what those feelings were. So not only did I get labeled as lazy, right? Because I wasn't spending as much time in the practice room as my counterparts, but I also ended up thinking that I was severely depressed. I mean, I probably was a little depressed to that end. However, I was convinced that I was severely depressed. So I sought out medication that was not right for me, right? Because I didn't know that I was just severely burnt out and truly just needed to take a week off, right? Needed to take a week off of work, take a week off of school, whatever it is that I needed to do. I needed to do those things, but I was unclear that was the problem, okay? Because again, in the music world, we tend to label burnout as laziness, right? Oh, you didn't feel like going to the practice room today? Oh, you were too tired to spend 4 hours on your instrument plus the instrument that you're working on in your methods class? Oh, you were too tired. Well, this other person wasn't, right? Not taking into account that, the person in front of them, we'll take me as an example, came from a lower socioeconomic status. I had to work, right? I was taking out, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in student loans. I was, I didn't have a car at that time. So transportation to my job was harder, right? And, I was tired. And I was constantly being told in my lessons that, if I didn't get a better flute, if I didn't get a better instrument, that I was not going to be welcome back in the studio the following year. And that was a huge problem, right? Because I already was poor, right? I was already working and barely making ends meet. And then I needed to add on top of that, spending $5,000 to $10,000 on an instrument that I simply could not afford. My parents couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford it, period. I didn't even have a car at that time. And so again, I think that we tend to label burnout, especially amongst musicians, as laziness, and it's simply not okay It's not okay. So, I want you to take a second. If you're watching this and you're like, wow, that sounds like me, I want you to take a second and think about burnout, right? Think about burnout. Think about what burnout actually is and think about how it mimics laziness, right? When I get burnt out, because I still struggle with burnout here and there, when I get burnt out, I find myself laying in bed more, scrolling through TikTok more, watching more TV, dissociating, zoning out, not doing the dishes, not doing laundry, not posting on social media, not practicing my instrument. I kind of label it as somewhat of a freeze state. That's how I think of it. And when I'm in this freeze state, it can look an awful lot like I'm being lazy. It really can. But the ability, it's not just the I don't want to, it's that I physically can't, right? Physically getting myself out of bed is hard. And so if you find yourself in that state, if you are let's say you're a music major and you're finding yourself in that state and you're like, I am just severely burnt out and I can't get out of bed. I can't. Not, I don't want to, not, I don't feel like it. I can't. Then you're probably burnt out. Because again, this world tends to value that and tends to wear burnout as a badge of honor. And that's one of the things that, a lot of us music teachers are out here trying to change, right? Because you can be an incredible musician. You can learn to practice more efficiently. We can lighten loads. We can, find resources for our students to help them through that rather than just going, well, you're lazy and you suck. Maybe you shouldn't be here. Because again, we are doing a disservice to the classical music world by allowing students like that who are potentially incredible musicians and who have a passion for it to slip through the cracks. And I say that as someone that it happened to. And luckily I came back. Luckily I came back to it. Not a lot do. And I think that again, we are doing the classical music world a disservice. We are doing these students a disservice by not correctly diagnosing the issue, because as a music teacher, that is part of my job, right? I made a joke on my YouTube channel the other day about how when I became a music teacher, I didn't realize that I was going to be an accountant, a therapist, a game designer. It's kind of a joke, right? But in all seriousness, part of my job as a one-on-one private lesson teacher is to recognize what's going on in my student and understanding when it could be burnout, not laziness, right? If I have a student that has practiced every day and let me back up a little bit. If you have a student that made it far enough in their musical career to become a music major, to audition in your program and become a music major, it's not likely that they're lazy. Because most of the people that I know that have graduated with music degrees are some of the hardest working individuals on the planet. Why do you think med schools and law schools and, all of those advanced schools love taking music majors? Why do you think that is? Because they know that that student can dedicate themselves in just the hardest way to a thankless career path, right? So it's not likely that a student who makes it that far is lazy. It's very likely that they are burnt out and they desperately need help. So let's take some time, right? Familiarize ourselves with the symptoms of burnout. Understand how they can look a lot like laziness. Understand how they can look a lot like depression, and try to figure it out rather than just throwing those students off to the side and saying, well, they're lazy, they don't belong here. Well, they're lazy, they're not going to hack it in the music world, because that's probably just not true. And again, we're doing a disservice to the classical music industry and the music industry as a whole by utilizing this idea of, well, we're just going to weed out the weak. This isn't the military. This isn't life or death. We're not weeding out the people that can't drag their own body weight, 40 yards. That's not what we're doing here. We are cultivating artists. We are cultivating musicians. And not only that, but we're also shaping the generation of people that are going to support the arts in the future. Because think about the people that you completely toss to the side and you say, well, you couldn't hack it, right? Do you think that that person is going to encourage their children to go into music as a career? Do you think that that person is going to donate to and fund arts programs in the future? Probably not, because they had a horrible experience with it. So again, burnout and laziness can look very, very, very similar, but it is so important to be able to recognize and label the differences, right? And to be able to provide resources and help when burnout is the root cause of the problems. Because again, if they're in your studio for private lessons, if they're in your studio as a music major, it's not likely that they are lazy. Okay, it's not likely that they don't want to be there at this point. Maybe as a piano teacher, I will be the first to admit piano and guitar teachers tend to get the people who don't necessarily care that much or want to be there. So I'm not going to argue that one bit. I think that, piano teachers are a lot stronger, but again, when it comes to these a little bit more niche instruments, and particularly at the higher levels, at the college levels, it is not likely that they are lazy if they have made it that far, if they have made it to you. So let's stop treating them like they are and find the root cause of the problem. I know that this one got a little bit political, and I know that this one was a hard topic, but I so appreciate you being here and I so appreciate you listening. We are going to change the music world one step at a time, and I'm just so happy that I get to be a part of that. So if this resonated with you, if you enjoy this type of content along with flute techniques and, flute methods, give me a follow. I'd really appreciate it. I'm so proud of you for showing up. See you later.